we live in a paradoxical time right now. This ought to be the most exciting time ever for the British economy. People should be really excited about the incredible opportunities created by this boom in emerging markets. More people than ever before have become consumers. More people than ever before have been projected out of poverty in countries like China, Brazil, India, and so on. And even today, when everybody talks about, the global economy's ground to halt, what they really mean is the West's economy has ground to halt. And, global growth this year is still going to be quite substantial, 3-4% probably, but all of that growth virtually will be in emerging markets. So why are we so despondent? Why is the UK's trend rate of growth over the next few years going to be so low? Why is everybody so depressed about our prospects? Well, that's because we've allowed ourselves to adopt a series of failed policies and failed attitudes in most areas of UK PLC, so to speak. We've got public spending still way too high. The good news is the coalition is gradually going to start bringing that down as a share of GDP. But I'll just quote to you my favourite figure about this, which is these figures from the OECD, these internationally comparable figures, which show that this is going to be the third year in a row that the UK government will spend more than half of GDP. This year is going to be about 50.1%. And, just a few years ago, in about 99, or 2000, when all of this was at its trough, the UK government spent only 37.5% of GDP. So there's been a massive transformation of the UK economy towards a traditional social democratic model. We've got a social democratic economy now with very large government spending, very high rates of taxation, a lot of people dependent on the state. There's about, the great tragedy of Britain today is that 5.7 million people or so, 5.7 million adults are on out-of-work benefits of one sort or another. It's a massive waste of talent and lives. And that's in addition to everything else. Now, of course, in a lot of these areas, the coalition is making some progress with welfare reform and so on. But I'm just painting this picture, this big picture. And then I would say that, I would argue that we're not moving away from it fast enough. In some cases, we're still going backwards. So what else is dragging us down? Education. Our education system is failing. You've got huge numbers of children and young adults leaving school with inadequate literacy and numeracy skills. You've got a lot of the universities producing degrees that are just not right for the modern workforce. You've got a general work ethic issue across the UK economy, which is why so many employers have been hiring so many people from Eastern Europe and other countries. We've got an infrastructure which is creaking, which needs investment, private sector investment. And we've got a very, very regulated economy, and I think that's truly one of the worst problems, is the amount of regulation now in the UK economy. Huge amounts of regulation. There's been a tidal wave of regulation, both from the UK government in recent years and also from the European Union. And the UK labour market is more regulated than it's ever been. I welcome what Michael was just saying about the deregulatory measure announced this week. But there's been about 7 major extra pieces of labour market legislation that have passed over the past 18 months in the UK, heaping billions of pounds of costs onto business, but more importantly, increasing the cost and riskiness of hiring people, which obviously therefore reduces the demand for people, hence why we're stuck in this situation where the private sector is not creating enough jobs. So that's the kind of society we live in. We live in a social democratic society with very high levels of public spending, very high levels of tax, but nevertheless a very big gap between these two, and a very regulated society, and at the same time a society where the public services aren't particularly good on average, despite the huge amounts of money that are spent on them all the time. And I think all parts of this issue need to be tackled urgently, and I think more urgently than the government is doing, though I do accept that they are doing some things. I just think that unless we do that, we are going to condemn ourselves to another decade of weak growth. We're going to have an economic performance that will be no better than that of middling European countries. And all that at a time when there's these huge opportunities all over the world which people in the UK and companies in the UK ought to be seizing. It ought to be exciting. They ought to be these huge markets opening up. Our trend rate of growth ought to be at record highs, not at record lows. So this is a paradox in which we live in. obviously there's massive short-term problems, and UK problems because of the massive budget deficit. But also, the Eurozone crisis is massive. Today, the financial markets were meltdown again. You just needed to look at what's happening. Virtually every single asset class is diminishing value right now. Equities, commodities, emerging markets, everything except for the government bonds of one or two countries. So that's the kind of world we live in, and obviously that's going to have a short-term negative effect on growth. And depending on how badly the Eurozone crisis is mismanaged, depending on how badly that is, that will inevitably have an effect here in the UK. But I'm more interested in the long run here. I'm more interested in how we're going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years' time. Are we going to be the kind of nation that aspires to be another Hong Kong of Europe, a Singapore of Europe, a hub, a trading hub, a place where people who want growth and want jobs and want success come to work? Or will we just be, completely subsumed really in a sort of sluggish, declining social democratic Europe? And I think that's really the question we need to ask ourselves.
Allister, thank you very much indeed.